Oh, look, it's Danny Bessner and Derek Davison of the American Prestige podcast. That must mean it's time for another high synergy, non-zero American Prestige collaboration because I am Robert Wright of the Nonzero podcast. So,
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
Good. That's Dr. Daniel Bessner, though, but don't make that mistake in the future.
Is it?
Yes, of
course.
Of
course you are.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking
Is
about
it really?
Derek.
Jesus Christ! Oh my God! You came in with a neg already.
I thought you were talking about Derek. I mean, all the lefties look alike to me after a while. So do you guys realize it's been almost a year since we first did one of these collaborations? Wow. We recorded right before October 7th, and because we hadn't posted,
that's right.
By October 7th, we recorded an addendum and talked about the consequences of October 7th. And although I am not a very sunny and optimistic person, even I did not imagine that things would be as bad as they are a year later. I think I said, well, Israel will definitely kill thousands of people in retaliation. I didn't have 1 in 50 Gazans in mind. And needless to say, I didn't see this pager thing coming and various other things that have happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're using it as a situation to solve the so-called Palestinian question, which was difficult to predict at the time. Obviously, a huge reprisal was definitely coming, but the fact that they were basically going to go to the max was unpredictable. I think, and especially the fact that the United States would let them do it. I am curious when scholars look into the archives to what degree Biden's senescence allowed this to happen. In retrospect, I don't think that was that was not a factor. It's kind of reminded me. I saw this great movie, Bob. You should check it out, called Reagan. And in the movie, they talk about the Iran-Contra scandal. It's so good. I think it's going to be nominated for many awards. But one of the interesting things was they talk about Iran-Contra, and the movie makes the argument that Reagan basically gave a wink and a nod. And my understanding of what historians think is that might have been true. But the question is, Reagan does seem to have experienced significant cognitive decline in his second term. And that does seem to maybe have actually led people to have more freedom to take relatively radical actions like the Iran-Contra scandal. I'm curious if something similar happened with the Biden administration and Netanyahu. My guess is that it did happen.
I disagree with this. I think Joe Biden is rabidly pro-Israel in a way that most of the other people in his administration are only institutionally pro-Israel. He's emotionally invested in this. I think if you turned this over to somebody like Antony Blinken, or certainly Kamala Harris at this point, they would not have let it get to this point if they could have anything to do with it.
I don't know.
Not that they care about the Palestinians, but purely from a political perspective, from the standpoint of how this looks, I think they would have blanched and done something. I think this is Biden driving the bus as
off the cliff,
mentally compromised as he might be. I think he's insisting on being in charge of this.
If that's true, and I mean, I don't doubt that his personal stamp on this had something to do with it, but if that's really true, why is this not reflected in Kamala Harris's rhetoric? I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't think observing that, Gaza has been devastated, or however she put it, she didn't put it very judgmentally, right? Like in the convention speech, for example. She, why is she saying essentially what Joe Biden has said, except with slightly different proportionality in terms of how much time she spends on Israel as opposed to Palestinian suffering? I don't see any difference.
Yeah, I just think fundamentally, I mean, I'm not saying that Kamala would have stopped the Israelis in their tracks on October 8th or anything like that. I think she would have allowed this to get very bad, but maybe not quite to this point. I think what you're seeing from her as a candidate is fundamentally she's not a particularly courageous politician. And for a sitting vice president to say things that make an obvious break with the incumbent president at this point, would take a degree of, I think,
Oh,
daring that's just not in her.
She could shade the rhetoric. I mean, for example, if she wanted to, she could just say something about the pager attack that was mildly edgy, and I doubt she has. I haven't really checked. And here's the thing. I mean,
right, but the fear, I think, for her is not just breaking with Biden, but that somebody will, if she says anything about the pager attack that's mildly critical, she'll get an avalanche of, oh, you're pro Hezbollah.
well,
And she's afraid of that, even though I don't think the politics. Yeah.
We're getting to my point
Yeah.
that America's handling of this is much more about American domestic politics and features of that endure from administration to administration in terms of political constraints they feel about what they can do than it is about Biden. Now, Biden has gone, the hugging BB and a few other things, but fundamentally refusing to exert meaningful leverage, and there is considerable leverage in theory at America's disposal. It's just what you would predict from American politics and what you always get.
Yeah, and I think that also points to a larger theoretical issue. I actually just published an edited volume on this. If anyone listening is interested, it's called Rethinking U.S. World Power. And it argues that domestic processes, phenomenon, and events from politics to interest groups to elections are much more important than any geostrategic rationale for not all, but a lot of American foreign policy. Which is kind of interesting because, professional foreign policy analysts, like all of us are to some degree, really do focus on the world as, to use the famous metaphor, as a bit of a risk game, like the board game Risk. But it's much more about quotidian domestic politics than anything else. And Israel is just the real highlight of this. And I think, Bob, you have your whole progressive realism philosophy. I do think it presents a genuine challenge for realism as a policy guide, which is why, of course, famously Walton Mersheimer had to write the Israel lobby, because nothing, according to realism, should say you do this. So there's a disconnect between how people think and understand foreign policy and what actually goes into making it, which I think is a crucial space for which people like us who want to change it need to examine much more.
Yeah.
So where I would say, where I would comment here is, and this started with talking about whether Biden is really driving the car or if he's so checked out that somebody else is doing it for him. Biden has let himself be humiliated over and over again by Benjamin Netanyahu throughout this process, like just been absolutely debased. And I think for any of these other guys, I'm not saying that I think you're right. The policy would be largely unchanged, but the impression, if you turned this over to Blinken, or if you turned it over to Jake Sullivan, or somebody who's a party functionary who is, pro-Israel in the sense that that's what you are if you're an American foreign policy elite, I think they would be more careful about the image of the U.S. president essentially being walked around like a dog by the Israeli prime minister over and over and over again. I think they'd be more sensitive to that than Biden is. Biden is apparently willing to eat an unending stream of shit. And that's why I think he's still driving the bus here, because
and that's the senescence,
I don't think anybody else would allow this to happen.
Yeah,
it could have something to do with the senescence, but again, I don't think. But I still think it indicates that he's in charge, even if he's mentally, as I said, mentally compromised. I still think he is running the ship on some level, in a direct way, and dictating what happens.
He may be, but I don't think a fundamentally different policy would have resulted from giving this to Anthony Blinken or Jake Sullivan. I mean, I didn't even know that ideologically they're all that different. But even if they were, unless they decided that they didn't care about the political consequences for the Democratic presidential candidate, I don't think you'd see anything fundamentally different. Let me quickly say, Danny, by the way, not all versions of realism minimize domestic politics. Mine doesn't, but also some earlier forms of realism don't.
Like, what are you talking about? If you're talking about classical, Bob, I wasted so many years of my life reading these guys.
Yeah. Well, anyway, mine doesn't. Progressive realism doesn't. You can
in
go
German,
to Wikipedia.
no less. In German, no less.
Google progressive realism.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
Mentioned. So, and I am telling you, it doesn't.
It's a second image
and
issue.
Clearly,
yeah,
and clearly, no, I don't think it's second dimension. I think
second image. The way Kenneth Waltz talks about causal forms in IR. Second image is domestic politics. Third image is the international sphere. First image is human psychology, basically human behavior.
But Danny, let me ask you. I mean, and you're right. Walt and Mearsheimer, they felt they had to kind of come up with a special explanation because it didn't fit in with certainly with, a lot of forms of realism for the U.S. to have a Middle Eastern policy that seemed to make so little sense in terms of American interests. Mm-hmm. But let me ask you, do you think that book greatly overstated the power of the Israel lobby? Because if you don't, then I would think you would expect more or less the policy you got from Biden, which is when push comes to shove. I mean, leave aside his own special window dressing and atmospherics, which have to do with his generation and his history and everything. But in terms of like not being willing to actually cut off the weapons supply, which is the ultimate leverage, and not being willing to morally condemn much of anything Israel does in strong terms, unless you think that book, the argument is greatly overstated, I don't see why any of this should surprise you or you should feel a need to attribute it to Biden's peculiarities. It's just what you would expect.
Yeah, I don't think the book necessarily overstated it. To be honest, I haven't read it in over a decade. But it didn't when I read it, it didn't seem overstated. I mean, this really goes back to a larger geostrategic debate that has been happening for about almost 100 years. Since the 1930s, it really takes off, which is what is the strategic role of the Middle East in terms of the U.S. national interest and U.S. geostrategy? And there are different debates. I believe, and I really hope I don't get this wrong, I believe that Kennan does make the Middle East one of like the key regions that the United States needs to control. It's not an industrial region at the time, but I do believe he thinks it's a key region. And then the question, there are different people have different arguments like as to how important the Middle East is to U.S. geostrategy in the 50s and the 60s, which is a moment, of course, when you all know you actually get different policies toward Israel. It's not as friendly toward Israel at every single moment.
Okay, sure, but Danny, those explanations tend to be about oil. Or at least many of them are. And
not just about oil, but it's more. It really is a lot more than oil. I think it's become like popularized as an oil. It has to do with like shipping, but also like roads to other regions.
But with any of those, let me just say, with any of those, one thing you don't predict is that America stands by and lets the entire region become engulfed in war.
No, that is correct.
Seems to be our highest aspiration to judge by American policy.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to get to that. I think that's a lot of inertia. I think we're in a moment of significant institutional inertia, which periodically happens again in American history. The late 1960s and early 1970s was another period, and that's when you get the rise of arguments about bureaucratic politics. Bob, did you, like when you were doing IR stuff in the 70s and 80s, this was like a major argument that to understand why the U.S. does what it does, you need to understand like literally the bureaucratic structure because it seemed like it wouldn't change. And I do think we're in a moment like that for both bureaucratic reasons. The state has become extraordinarily more complicated than it was in the 1970s. And also we do have this famous gerontocracy that everyone's talking about that does lead to path dependence. But yeah, no, I would agree. I think that's what the actions suggest.
Yeah, I don't know. It's depressing. I mean, the pager thing.
That's for sure.
I just thought, I don't know. Derek, let me ask you a question that if any of us knows the answer to, only you do probably. So Saudi Arabia just said, I think for the first time clearly, recently, since the big Abraham Accords push and Biden's desire to continue the Abraham Accords and get Saudi-Israeli normalization, MBS said, I think just yesterday,
yes,
there will be no normalization until there is a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Now, Biden Biden was hoping to get him to sign on with in exchange for some vague promise that Bibi wouldn't plan to actually deliver on. And I'm wondering, what do you think is behind that? I assume the pager thing isn't what pushed the politics over the edge from Saudi's point of view, but what do you think's going on?
So, I mean, the whole conceit of the Abraham Accords is that it takes the old Arab League offer, which is we'll normalize relations with Israel in return for a Palestinian state, and it guts them, right? It says we're going to normalize relations with Israel anyway, and we'll have a little bit of window dressing in the thing about some kind of progress toward a Palestinian state. The line from the Saudis up until Wednesday, for even since October 7th, prior to October 7th, there was every indication that they were ready to do a deal without the Palestinians at all. And then after October 7th, when the response became what it was, and tens of thousands of people started dying, the Saudi position became we'll normalize for meaningful progress toward a Palestinian state. What he said on Wednesday was basically back to the Arab League position. It seemed like it. I think I read the full statement, and there's a little bit of, in English. I didn't read the original. My Arabic is not that good, but he gave this in a televised address, first of all, so it puts him kind of on the line with the Saudi public. And it leaves a little bit of wiggle room where you could say, if there's, really major progress here that the Israelis are willing to commit to, we could go ahead with the normalization. But fundamentally, it restores, we're back to square one, I guess, from the Biden administration's perspective. He's demanding a Palestinian state, and then we'll do normalization. And I think, I think the politics for him, he's been telling people, and there's been a lot of speculation about whether he means this or not, but he's supposedly been telling, his interlocutors in the Biden administration that if I go ahead with this, if I go ahead with normalization without a Palestinian state, I will be killed. I'll be assassinated. And there's been a lot of question about does he really believe this, or is this just a line he's using to kind of force some progress? But I do think he's sensitive. Even if he's using it as a line, it suggests that he's sensitive to the politics of moving forward, especially in this moment. Before October 7th, nobody was thinking about the Palestinians. It had kind of dropped off for a lot of people in the Middle East and out. But now the politics of doing it for him, I think, are very difficult, if not impossible. He wants to be seen as the guy who solves this problem. If he comes in and does normalization with Israel, it has to be riding in on a white horse to save Gaza, to save, this is the image that he wants to project. And I think, he's sees that that's not going to happen. The Israelis aren't even willing to promise window dressing at this point. Nothing. They're not willing to do anything for the Palestinian state. And so, it would be embarrassing for him to go ahead with normalization right now. I think what he would like to see is for the U.S. to just go ahead and give him the goodies that he wants anyway, the defense treaty, support for the nuclear program, because the U.S. has other interests in keeping the Saudis happy and keeping them from kind of drifting toward China, I guess, if we're in a new Cold War framework, or support maybe to support the U.S. against Russia, if that's the primary concern. But so, I think he's hoping for those reasons he can get what he wants out of the U.S. without having to touch this other
Derek,
thing.
A couple of quick things. One, should we announce that we're moving to Neom? And then two,
wasn't going to do that on Bob's show,
but a big announcement here, supporting cast in Neom. But Derek,
did you see that video? There was some influencer
it was wild.
video.
Courtney's doing something on it.
Oh my God, it looked horrible. It looked like
they're looking in prison.
They're eating in a cafeteria in prison. Yeah, it was just
with their kids without friends. But I did have a question for maybe both of you. What do you think as the reality of a Palestinian state becomes less and less likely, which I think is my read of the situation, that it's becoming more and more mythic to the point where it's annoying when U.S. officials talk about a two-state solution that is clearly not in the offing. How do you think that will that, or is it too soon to tell, make leaders like MBS rethink their relationship to the Palestinian national movement? Because it just seems like Israel, like you said, is not going to do that. It's going to annihilate Gaza, and it's going to make further and further incursions into the West Bank, basically making it impossible for people to live there. How is that going to affect the larger region? Because like at some point, it's going to be obvious that there isn't going to be a Palestinian state. So what is someone like MBS going to do?
I mean, I think he was happy to normalize. I mean, again, the conceit of the Abraham Accords was we're going to normalize and forget the Palestinians, just forget it. And this was, Jared Kushner's plan. It was like, when the Palestinians are never going to get a state, but we'll like throw some economic aid at them, and they can get jobs in Israel as day laborers or whatever, and they'll be happy with that. The Biden push to get the Saudis to join up with this and normalize with Israel before October 7th. I mean, we've talked about this. This is probably one of the reasons why the Palestinians moved, is because it was on the verge of happening with
You
no
mean October 7th?
protection for the Palestinians.
Is that what you mean? Yeah. Okay.
Right. I mean, one of the factors motivating this operation, I think, must have been, we're basically slipping out of the public consciousness. Like this is disastrous. We've lost whatever little bit of leverage we had with the idea of normalization with the Arab states. And for if the Saudis would have gone ahead with it, it would have been that would be the end of it. So I think, if things quiet down ever again, to the point where people aren't thinking about the Palestinians, I think MBS would be fine to go ahead. And he's, there would be economic, commercial advantages for the Saudis to do that. He's probably, I guess, thinking long term. He's a young guy. He should be on the throne for quite a while. But
another 140 years if his ancestors are to indicate anything.
But to do it now when it's so blatant and the issue is so resonant with the Arab publics in all of these different countries, I can't. I think he'll just
so he'll wait. He'll wait
like
5 years or 10 years, whatever.
But he will keep pushing for the other stuff, for the stuff he wants from the U.S. and he's got leverage there that's independent of Israel Palestine.
Yeah. No, it's the few optimists left, the few long-term optimists left will say, well, sometimes it takes a convulsion, something dramatic and horrific to create fundamental structural change. World War II led to the United Nations or whatever. But
that was awesome. That worked out great.
But it was a major thing. And
I'm writing about this right now. So you don't buy Wartime's argument? Have you ever read his book that it was basically bullshit from the beginning? That if you look at the documents, this was always going to be a tool.
It was the five most powerful. It's the powerful nations will run the world. That itself,
but even beyond. So I think if Roosevelt had lived.
But wait, let me just say on the Palestinian thing. The problem is, as you suggested, Danny, that even if things got so much worse and so horrific, and they'd have to get worse, even worse, before this happened, that a lot of powerful nations said, come on, we got to just solve this problem. The problem is that at this point, it's almost just logistically impossible in the West Bank. I mean, the number, with all the settlements and all the roads, it's just, so I just don't know where we're heading. And I think Israel, of course, whenever you're talking about Israel or any country, you should get back to the distinction you made, Danny, between the idea of a nation pursuing its interests and the idea of politicians pursuing their interests. Everything Israel has done makes sense in terms of Bibi's political interest.
Yeah,
everything they've
100%,
done since October 7th. But how it's in Israel's long-term interests is a little less clear to me. And it's the same thing with this pager thing.
It seems like an Indian removal policy, right? That seems to be what they're doing. Early 19. Yeah.
It's not just logistically impossible in the West Bank. It's logistically impossible in Gaza now. They've destroyed Gaza. There's no buildings left standing.
But at least there aren't a bunch of settlements.
They've wiped out the rebuilding itself would take a decade, and that's assuming there's not another round of this, 5
And
years from now, which
blockades
is
and whatnot.
impossible. It's impossible
Construction
to
materials.
But sure, a
so
decade-long Marshall Plan, but even that wouldn't do it in the West Bank.
It was so hard to get the Marshall Plan
well,
passed. Oh my God. I'm
wouldn't do it
literally
in the West
reading
Bank,
about this right now. Sorry, I'm going into the details.
Well,
Marshall Plan almost didn't pass. Like, it was really, really tough. And the way they got the Marshall Plan passed was to threaten communist world revolution. So, like, I guess we would have to threaten China in the Middle East, but that's definitely not happening. But I'm in like that other plastic moment in the 1940s, and it's just wild how almost all the stuff that's pointed to as like good, like came extraordinarily close not to happening. And I think we're in a moment where it's going to be the not happening that actually happens.
There's no constituency in Israeli politics for giving up the West Bank. That's the thing. Like,
right.
There used to be a left that was, it was fringe, it was small, but it called for the end of the occupation. And I'm not talking about labor Zionism or that sort of thing, but on the far left, that's gone as far
they're
as
all in America now.
There's absolutely nothing left in Israeli politics. So this would have to be a resolution forced from the outside, and who's going to do that? Like, the United States isn't going to do it. Why would China bother involving itself in something like this? Why would
as I said, things would have to get even worse. That's this is just bad news. I mean, things would have to. There would have to be so much more slaughter. I mean, this would have to turn into a wider war, a lot more people killed, and so on, before you got this kind of like, okay, let's have a serious talk about this. And again, no, I just don't know where this is heading, because I think Israel. I mean, I had two thoughts after the pager thing. First of all, like, I couldn't figure out what the most plausible explanation, I think, is one that you guys have heard, which is that the plan was the pagers go off right when Israel is going to invade, or right when a war is starting. Right.
Exactly.
And if that's the case, they better invade within the next couple of days for this to make any sense. But if they don't, then one explanation is that was the plan, but then they caught some people in Lebanon caught wind of it, and the cover was going to be blown, so they figured we better blow them up now. That's a kind of explanation. But if it's not that, I mean, I was groping for.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bob, but is that not like just depravity? I mean, to say we've sabotaged, we booby trapped these consumer devices, which first of all is a violation of international law. But okay, we booby trapped these electronic devices to set off. If we're ready to invade Lebanon, we're going to blow them up and cause a lot of chaos, and that'll cover our invasion. You find out that, or you get wind that they've like learned of the plot, and you might lose these things if you don't blow them up with no strategic idea of what you're going to do to follow it up. And your decision is, let's just blow them up, because what the hell? We can't lose these valuable bombs that we've implanted. Is that not just depraved? I mean, I don't know. It seems
if you ask,
just insane.
If you're
logic
asking, is there any plausible rationale remaining in that situation? I guess what Israel would say is, we think it's likely that there is going to be a war soon, maybe in part because we want one, and although we didn't manage to time this optimally because, they caught wind of it, it is still valuable both to disrupt their communications infrastructure, but also, look, you blow up a couple thousand of these things. I assume they are distributed mainly to higher level, kind of mid-level management and upward. Yeah, you're incapacitating some non-trivial people. You're definitely disrupting the organization. So if there's a war within a couple of weeks, in cold, hard terms, you would say Israel is better off along that dimension, just the military dimension, having done this, right? I guess that's what they'd say. But
and also, it's like Derek, Seamus, we had Seamus Malakafzali on our podcast, and it just like fucks with your psychology too, because now they're all going to be thinking about everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that is like a huge win for Israel. Like, every time a guy picks up a device, I mean, not in the course of humanity, but in course of their own perceived strategic interests. Yeah, they just want to fuck shit up. I think that's pretty clear. They just want to fuck the region up, and the U.S. is letting them do it. They're doing crazy things, like objectively crazy things.
The level of disregard for Arab life that you have to have for this to make sense is is, I mean, if we looked at it in any other context, we would think this is a depraved country. This is a depraved group of people doing this, or a depraved, person, whatever, taking these actions, who just has no regard for the lives of the people who might be threatened by it, and not, not even the Hezbollah operatives, as Seamus said, and we've talked about. Like, you don't know who's around these people when these things go off. You don't know where they are. You don't know if somebody's driving a car and his, pager blows up and he rams the car into something. And, maybe we didn't see any of that. I mean, maybe we, by some miracle, there were only a couple of kids, but only a couple of civilians who were killed by this. But you don't know that it's going to be that lucky.
No.
You don't know that one of these things isn't going to blow up on an airplane. You don't know that these worst case scenarios, and you just go ahead with it. It's sick. It's terrorism is what it is, and we won't call it that, but that's what
on the one hand, I would say the rate of collateral damage is certainly no higher than in Gaza. If we define collateral damage as just death of civilian, ratio of like Hamas personnel or Hezbollah personnel to civilians killed, I would think this is, a less inhumane operation in that sense. And for that matter, the rate of collateral damage in this is probably not worse than some American operations or various other operations have had. But what's distinctive about this, it seems to me, is that, usually with collateral damage, you can say, well, we were aiming at this one guy and shit happens. In this case,
Right.
as you said, Derek, you got to know that some shit is going to happen in this case. And so it's kind of a worse look for Israel. And one thing, I think one of Israel's biggest strategic problems, and I've said this before, has long been their basic view is hatred of Israel or hatred of the Jews, depending on how they conceive it, is like a universal constant. So nothing you do is going to really affect how much of that there is in the world or in your regional environment. And if that's your view, then you don't think about things like this. Like, what are the optics? Like, we got a video of this thing blowing up in a grocery store that's going all over the world, and that is certainly going to inflame opinion in the Arab world. Although, again, I think Israel's view is you can't inflame it further. Like, there is just so much hatred of us that it doesn't matter. We got to do what we got to do and keep killing them until they finally relent.
Yeah, it's a post-Holocaust trauma response. Obviously, right? That's
certainly
baked
can be,
into the founding of the nation state itself. But one thing that I also don't think they take it that seriously is Jews are concentrated in two places, the United States and Israel, for the most part. And Israel has nuclear weapons, and the Jewish position in the United States has always been very different from the Jewish position in Europe. And we could get into that conversation if you'd like, but I just don't think they're fundamentally that worried about engendering anti-Semitism around the world for those two reasons.
Well, the claim is they can't, right? Like, in fact, it's considered an anti-Semitic trope, right, to say that anything Israel does increases the amount of anti-Semitism. Isn't that the official thing? Like,
I haven't really heard. I mean, I think they just use it as a rhetorical cudgel.
Conflating Israel and Jews is overall anti-Semitic. So I guess you could say,
even though that has been the project of the organized American Jewish community and the Israeli community since the 1950s. That to me is so annoying as someone who grew up in that community. Like, literally, that is the message that is drilled into you from the age of 0. And I don't think it's not a matter of dual loyalty. It's just the identification of Jewry with Israel, right? In the post-Holocaust period, those three things are linked.
But to be clear,
deliberately, institutionally,
to say that something Israel does could increase the amount of anti-Semitism or could increase the expression of anti-Semitism is not to make that conflation between Israel and Jews yourself. It is to attribute that conflation to the anti-Semites or to the people who are more anti-Semitic now than they would have been before whatever Israel did.
Right.
But now there are 4 of us. But for those of you listening and not watching, boy, are you missing possibly the best looking member of the Bessner family. Although no, that's
I won't, Bob. I won't tell. I won't tell Courtney. I won't tell Courtney that. She'll be
the best looking one that's on camera now is what I meant.
But well, that's definitely true. Okay, hey buddy. Here. Sorry, I'll be right back. Talking about the future of world Jewry. The future of world Jewry entered the stage.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the two Gentiles should definitely have that conversation.
Yeah. So, well, I was just about to say it's time to go into overtime. Bring down that paywall. But there's Danny. So we should probably. It's probably about time. Is it to do this mercenary thing we do, or we say we're going to talk for another several weeks, but all of that is available only to, as we call them, Nonzero members, or what is your euphemistic term for paid subscribers at American Prestige?
All of our listeners are prestige heads,
Patriots.
Right? Patriots, heroes. But before we drop the paywall, I just want to say for all you AP listeners out there, please remember that we are moving to supporting cast. Your feeds will stop updating for paid subscribers on September 20th. Free subscribers, you don't need to do anything, but you do need to subscribe to compensate our labor because you are all true leftists and you should compensate labor.
Okay.
But for the paid subscribers, please sign up for supporting cast. Check the link in the show notes. Check our announcements, et cetera, et cetera.
And I want to ask you a question about that. But first, I want to say, as long as we're doing promotion, subscribe to the Nonzero newsletter. Even as a free subscriber, there's a ton of stuff. Just a ton, tons and tons, and it's going to grow. You'd be surprised.
Bob, do you give everything away to free subscribers? Like you give your entire back catalog away?
We have there's often a pay, like the Friday newsletter has like maybe 6-7 items, and usually halfway through. So the first 3 are free, and then there's a paywall, and then most of the podcasts have what we're about to enter, which is this overtime segment.
Cool.
But I was gonna ask you, so just to be clear for the people you're trying to get to do the right thing here, what they should do is
the leftist thing, the moral thing, the humane thing.
Yeah, yeah. But they should go to their. I'm trying to help you guys out. I'm. This is like, this is the thanks I get for.
I'm sorry,
never
Bob, I can't
having anything other than American Prestige's commercial interests at the forefront of my consciousness. So here's my question: are you saying that people should go to their podcast app, search for American Prestige, and then there's a particular version, the new version because actually, look, let me show you something. I've done it. They're different colors. No, I think I've done it. Or have I not? You tell me.
So, Derek, not quite close, but Derek, you want to?
Yeah, our free feed should not be affected. So if you just go into Apple Podcasts and search for American Prestige and you're not a subscriber, you want to listen to our free content, that should be unchanged as of Friday. It's for the people who are, Danny is trying to remind our subscribers, paid subscribers, many of whom have, I gather, not made the switch yet, that their current feeds from Substack are going to be going the way of the dodo on Friday.
Oh, I see. So you're talking about people who pasted in the RSS.
Precisely. They need a new pasted. Exactly. Okay. You need a new pasted in RSS from supporting cast to not miss any of your favorite podcasts.
By the way, for those who have never taken the plunge in either of our cases, and become,
may God have mercy on your souls.
I was going to say that, but
what
also,
are you doing? You're not subscribed to either. What are you doing?
No, they just like free labor. That's just it.
I guess,
like the Republican Party, they like free labor.
I think we should be more charitable. These people. I think unlike the Republican Party, enlightenment is a possibility for these people. We should try to guide them along.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's why you're a Buddhist and I'm a Jew.
That's right. So anyway, the RSS thing is something you do when you're a paid subscriber, and then you have this magical podcast feed for paid subscribers only, and it always has the overtime segment or whatever. So with that said, what are we going to talk about? We're going to go deep on JFK assassination. Is that your plan, Danny?
I want to interview you about JFK.
Bring it on. Yeah. Bring it on. I'm so ready for that.
I cannot wait, actually.
And we'll probably mention, what else? Are we going to talk about this more? It's so depressing.
I know, it is so goddamn depressing.
JFK.
Well, we've got
Yeah,
so much
let's- I mean-
content coming up. Well, Derek, I just want to tell them we have an episode with Rashid Khalidi coming out on Tuesday that I think gets really deep into this. That's really an excellent episode. And if anyone's interested in the Lebanon, we just did a special with Seamus. So check that out.
All right. With all that said, we're going to go talk about JFK assassination. I have thoughts. And other stuff, including some contemporary stuff. We should say something about Ukraine before this is all over.
Oh, yeah, let's do that. We had an
Maybe-
episode with Mark
maybe
James
more
on
of it.
Ukraine if people want an update on that too.
But thanks, everybody. Regardless
Thanks,
of whether
everybody.
you're sticking
Thank you. We
around
love you
with
all.
us.
We love you all.
We love
do.
you all. That's what
We-
Danny
you
meant
know,
to say earlier.
We'd
when
love you
he
more if
insulted
you paid us,
everyone.
but we love you anyway.
Yeah.
You're all God's children in our eyes. So, Bob, could I start with the JFK thing?